Alright, this is Timeline Part 2. We're on page 17 for anybody who wants to follow along. Okay, here we go. It's by Michael Crichton. Look, right here. In the hospital, the old man slept, his face partly covered by an oxygen mask. He was calm now. She'd given him a light sedative, and he was relaxed, his breathing easy. Beverly Sosi stood on the foot of the bed, reviewing the case with Joe Nieto, a Mescalero Apache who was a skilled internist and a very good diagnostician. White male, ballpark 70 years old, comes in confused, obtunded, disoriented 3x3. Mild congestive heart failure, slightly elevated liver enzymes. Otherwise nothing. And they didn't hit him with the car. Apparently not, but it's funny. They say they found him wandering around the north of Corazon Canyon. There's nothing there for 10 miles in any direction. So? This guy's got no signs of exposure, Joe. No dehydration, no ketosis. He's not even sunburned. You think somebody dumped him? Got tired of Grandpa grabbing the remote? Yeah, that's my guess. What about the fingers? I don't know, she said. He has some kind of circulatory problem. His fingers are cold, turning purple. They could even go gangrenous. Whatever it is, it's gotten worse since he's been in the hospital. He diabetic? No. Raymond's? No. Nieto went over the bedside, looking at the fingers. Only the tips are involved. All the damage is distal. Right, she said. If he wasn't found in the desert, I'd call that frostbite. You check him for heavy metals, Bev? Because this could be toxic exposure to heavy metals. Cadmium or arsenic. That would explain the fingers and also his dementia. I drew the samples, but heavy metals go to UNH in Albuquerque. I wouldn't have the report back for 72 hours. You have any ID? Medical history? Anything? Nothing. We put a missing persons out on him, and we transmitted his fingerprints to Washington for a database check, but that could take a week. Nieto nodded. And when he was agitated, babbling, what did he say? It was all rhymes, the same thing over and over. Something about Gordon and Stanley, and then he would say, Quandam phone makes me roam. Quandam? Isn't that Latin? She shrugged. It's been a long time since I was in church. I think quantum is a word in Latin, Nieto said. And then they heard a voice say, Excuse me? It was the bespectacled kid in the bed across the hall, sitting with his mother. We're still waiting for the surgeon to come in, Kevin, Beverly said to him. Then we can set your arm. He wasn't saying quantum foam, the kid said. He was saying quantum foam. What? Quantum foam. He was saying quantum foam. They went over to him. Nieto seemed amused. And what exactly is quantum foam? The kid looked at them earnestly, blinking behind his glasses. At very small subatomic dimensions, the structure of space-time is irregular. It's not smooth, it's sort of bubbly and foamy, and because it's way down at the quantum level, it's called quantum foam. How old are you? Nieto said. 11. His mother said, He reads a lot. His father's at Los Alamos. Nieto nodded. And at what point of this quantum foam, Kevin? There isn't any point, the kid said. It's just how the universe is at the subatomic level. Why would this old guy be talking about it? Because he's a well-known scientist, Wanaka said, coming toward them. He glanced at a sheet of paper in his hand. Just came in on the MPD, Joseph A. Traub, 71 years old, materials physicist. Specialist in superconducting metals, reported missing by his employer ITC Research in Black Rock around noon today. Black Rock? It's way over near Sandria. It was several hours away in central New Mexico. How the hell did this guy get to Corazon Canyon, Arizona? I don't know, Beverly said, but he's... The alarm began to sound. It happened with a swiftness that stunned Jimmy Wanaka. The old man raised his head from the bed, stared at them, eyes wild, and then he vomited blood. His oxygen mask turned bright red. Blood spurted from the mask, running in streaks across his cheeks and chin, spattering the pillow, the wall. He made a gurgling sound. He was drowning in his own blood. Beverly was already running across the room. Wanaka ran after her. "Turn the head," Nieto was saying, coming up to the bed. "Turn it!" Beverly had pulled off the oxygen mask and was trying to turn the old man's head, but he struggled, fighting her, still gurgling, eyes wide with panic. Wanaka pushed past her, grabbed the old man's head with both hands, and wrenched it hard, twisting him bodily to the side. The man vomited again. Blood sprayed all over the monitors and over Wanaka. "Suction!" Beverly shouted, pointing to a tube at the wall. Wanaka tried to hold the man and grab for the tube, but the floor was slick with blood. He slipped, grabbing at the bed for support. "Come on, people," Sosie shouted. "I need you! Suction!" She was on her knees, shoving her fingers into the man's mouth, pulling on his tongue. Wanaka scrambled to his feet, saw Nieto holding out a suction line. He grabbed it with bloody, slippery fingers, and saw Nieto twist the wall valve. Beverly took the neoprene probe, started sucking out the guy's mouth and nose. Red blood ran up the tubes. The man gasped, coughing. But he was growing weaker. "I don't like this," Beverly said. "We better—" The monitor alarms changed tone, high-pitched, steady. "Cardiac arrest." "Damn," she said. There was blood all over her jacket, her blouse. "Paddles! Get the paddles!" Nieto was standing over the bed, holding the paddles in outstretched arms. Wanaka scrambled at the back from the bed as Nancy Hood pushed her way through. There were people cluttering all around the man now. Wanaka smelled a sharp odor and knew the man's bowels had released. He suddenly realized the old man was going to die. "Clear!" Nieto said as he pushed down on the paddles. The body jolted on the table. The bottles were all clattered. The monitor alarms continued. Beverly said, "Close the curtain, Jimmy." He looked back and saw the bespectacled kid across the room staring, his mouth open. Wanaka yanked the drapes shut. An hour later, an exhausted Beverly Sosie dropped down at a desk in the corner to write up the case summary. It would have to be unusually complete because the patient had died. As she thumbed through the chart, Jimmy Wanaka came up with a cup of coffee for her. "Thanks," she said. "By the way, do you have the phone number for that ITC company? I have to call them." "I'll do that for you," Wanaka said, resting his hand briefly on her shoulder. "You've had a tough day." Before she could say anything, Wanaka had gone to the next desk, flipped open his notepad, and started dialing. He smiled at her as he waited for the call to go through. "ITC Research." He identified himself and said, "I'm calling about your missing employee, Joseph Traub." "One moment, please. I'll collect you to our Director of Human Resources." He'd waited on hold for several minutes. Music played. He cupped his hand over the phone and, as casually as he could, said to Beverly, "Are you free for dinner, or are you seeing your granny?" She continued to write, not looking up from the chart. "I'm seeing Granny." He gave a little shrug. "Just thought I'd ask," he said. "But she goes to bed early, about 8 o'clock. He gave a little shrug. Is that right?" She smiled, still looking down at her notes. "Yes." Wanaka grinned. "Well, okay." "Okay." The phone clicked again, and he heard a woman say, "Hold, please. I'm putting you through to our Senior Vice President, Dr. Gordon." "Thank you," he thought. He thought Senior Vice President. Another click, then a gravelly voice. "This is John Gordon speaking." "Dr. Gordon, this is James Wanaka of the Gallup Police Department. I'm calling you from McKinley Hospital in Gallup," he said. "I'm afraid I have some bad news." Seen through the picture windows of the ITC conference room, the yellow afternoon sun gleamed off of 5 glass and steel laboratory buildings of the Black Rock Research Complex. In the distance, afternoon clouds were forming over the far desert, but inside the room, the 12 ITC board members were turned away from the view. They were having coffee at a side table, talking to one another while they were waiting for the meeting to begin. Board meetings always ran into the night because the ITC president, Robert Doninger, was a notorious insomniac, and he scheduled them that way. It was a tribute to Doninger's brilliance that the board members, all CEOs and major venture capitalists, came anyway. Right now, Doninger had yet to make an appearance. John Gordon, Doninger's burly vice president, thought he knew why. Still talking on a cell phone, Gordon began to make his way toward the door. At one time, Gordon had been an Air Force project manager and still had a military bearing. His blue business suit was freshly pressed, and his black shoes shone. Holding his cell phone to his ear, he said, "I understand, officer," and he slipped out the door. Just as he thought, Doninger was in the hallway, pacing up and down like a hyperactive kid, while Diane Kramer, ITC's head attorney, stood on one side listening to him. Gordon saw Doninger jabbing his finger in the air at her angrily. Clearly he was giving her hell. Robert Doninger was 38 years old, a brilliant physicist and a billionaire. Despite a potbelly and gray hair, his manner remained youthful or juvenile, depending on who you talked to. Certainly age had not mellowed him. ITC was his third startup company. He had grown rich from the others, but his management style was as caustic and nasty as ever. Nearly everybody in the company feared him. In deference to the board meeting, Doninger had put on a blue suit, forgoing his usual khakis and sweats, and he looked uncomfortable in the suit, like a boy whose parents made him dress up. "Well, thank you very much, Officer Wanaka," Gordon said into the cell phone. "We'll make all the arrangements." "Yes, we'll do that immediately. Thank you again." Gordon flipped the phone shut and turned to Doninger. "Traub's dead, and they've identified his body." "Where?" "Gallup. That was a cop calling from the ER." "What do they think he died of?" "They don't know. They think massive cardiac arrest, but there was a problem with his fingers, a circulatory problem. They're going to do an autopsy. It's required by law." Doninger waved his hand, a gesture of irritable dismissal. "Big fucking deal. The autopsy won't show anything. Traub had transcription errors. They'll never figure it out. Why are you wasting my time with this shit?" "One of your employees just died, Bob," Gordon said. "That's true," Doninger said coldly, "and you know what? There's fuck all I can do about it. I feel sorry. Oh me, oh my. Send some flowers. Just handle it, okay?" At moments like this, Gordon would take a deep breath and remind himself that Doninger was no different from most other aggressive young entrepreneurs. He would remind himself that behind the sarcasm, Doninger was nearly always right, and he would remind himself that in any case, Doninger had behaved this way all his life. Robert Doninger had shown early signs of genius, taking up engineering textbooks while still in grade school. By the time he was 9, he could fix any electronic appliance, a radio or a TV, fiddling with the vacuum tubes and wires until he got it working. When his mother expressed concerns that he would electrocute himself, he told her, "Don't be an idiot." And when his favorite grandmother died, a dry-eyed Doninger informed his mother that the old lady still owed him $27, and he expected her to make good on it. After graduating summa cum laude in physics for Stanford at the age of 18, Doninger had gone to Femilab near Chicago, and he quit after 6 months, telling the director of the lab that particle physics is for jerk-offs. He returned to Stanford, where he worked in what he regarded as a more promising area, superconducting magnetism. This was a time when scientists of all sorts were leaving the university to start companies to exploit their discoveries. Doninger left after a year to found TechGate, a company that made the components for the precision chip etching that Doninger had invented in passing. When Stanford protested that he'd made these discoveries while working at the lab, Doninger said, "If you've got a problem, sue me. Otherwise, shut up." It was at TechGate that Doninger's harsh management style became famous. During the meetings with his scientists, he'd sit in the corner, tipped precariously back in his chair, firing off questions. "What about this? Why aren't you doing that? What's the reason for this?" If the answer satisfied him, he'd say, "Maybe." And that was the highest praise anyone ever got from Doninger. But if he didn't like the answer, and he usually didn't, he'd snarl, "Are you brain dead? Do you aspire to be an idiot? Do you want to die stupid? You're not even a half-wit." When really annoyed, he threw pencils and notebooks and screamed, "Assholes! You're all fucking assholes!" Lovely guy. TechGate employed up Techgate employees put up with the tantrum of Death March Doniger because he was a brilliant physicist. Better than they were, because he knew the problems his teams were facing, and because his criticisms were invariably on point. Unpleasant as it was, this stinging style worked. Techgate made remarkable advances in 2 years. The same year, in 1984, he sold the company for $100 million. That same year, Time magazine listed him as one of the 50 people under age 25 who will shape the rest of the century. The list also included Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. God damn it, Doniger said, turning to Gordon. Do I have to do everything myself? Jesus, where did they find Traub? In the desert, on the Navajo reservation. Where exactly? All I know is 10 miles north of Corazon. Apparently there's not much out there. All right, Doniger said, but then get Barretto from security to drive Traub's car into Corazon and leave it in the desert, puncture a tire, and walk away. Diane Kramer cleared her throat. She was dark-haired, in her early 30s, dressed in a black suit. I don't know about that, Bob, she said, in her best lawyerly tone. You're tampering with evidence. Of course I'm tampering with evidence. That's the whole point. Somebody's got to ask how Traub got out there, so leave his car for them to find. But we don't know exactly where. It doesn't matter exactly where. Just do it. That means Barretto plus somebody else knows about this. And who gives a damn? Nobody. Just do it, Diane. There was a short silence. Kramer stared at the floor, frowning, clearly still unhappy. Look, Doniger said, turning to Gordon, you remember when Garmin was going to get the contract to my old company, wasn't? You remember the press talk? I remember, Gordon said. You were so worried about it, Doniger said, smirking. Explain to Kramer. He explained to Kramer. Garmin was a fat pig. Then he lost a lot of weight because his wife put him on a diet. We leaked that Garmin had an inoperable cancer, and his company was going to fold. He denied it, but nobody believed him because of the way he looked. We got the contract. I sent a big basket of fruit to his wife. He left. But the point is, nobody ever got to trace the leak to us. All's fair, Diane. Business is business. Get the goddamn car out in the desert. She nodded, but was still looking at the floor. And then, Doniger said, I want to know how the hell Traub got in the transit room in the first place, because he already made too many trips, and he accumulated too many transcription defects. He was past his limit. He wasn't supposed to make any more trips. He wasn't cleared for transit. We have a lot of security around that room, so how'd he get in? We think he had a maintenance clearance to work on the machines, Kramer said. He waited until evening between shifts and took a machine, but we're checking all that now. I don't want you to check it, Doniger said sarcastically. I want you to fix it, Diane. We'll fix it, Bob. You better, goddammit, Doniger said, because this company now faces 3 significant problems, and Traub is the least of them. The other 2 are major. Ultra, major. Doniger had always had a gift for the long view. Back in 1984, he sold the Techgate because he foresaw that computer chips were going to hit the wall. At the time, this seemed nonsensical. Computer chips were doubling in power every 18 months, while the costs were halved. But Doniger recognized that these advances were made by cramming components closer and closer together on the chip. It couldn't go on forever. Eventually, circuits would be so densely packed that the chips would melt from the heat. This implied an upper limit on computer power. Doniger knew that society would demand even more raw computational power, but he didn't see any way to accomplish it. Frustrated, he returned to an earlier interest, superconducting magnetism. He started a second company, Advanced Magnetics, which owned several patents essential for the new magnetic resonance imaging, machines that were starting to revolutionize medicine. Advanced Magnetics was paid $250,000 in royalty for every MRI machine made. It was a cash cow, Doniger once said, and about as interesting as milking a cow. Bored and seeking new challenges, he sold out in 1988 and was 28 years old and worth $1 billion. But in his view, he had yet to make his mark. In the following year, 1989, he started ITC. One of Doniger's heroes was the physicist Richard Feynman. In the early 1880s, Feynman had speculated that it might be possible to build a computer using the quantum attributes of atoms. Theoretically, such a quantum computer would be billions and billions of times more powerful than any computer ever made. But Feynman's idea implied a genuinely new technology, a technology that had been built from scratch, a technology that had changed all the rules because nobody could see a practical way to build a quantum computer. Feynman's idea was soon forgotten, but not by Doniger. In 1989, Doniger set out to build the first quantum computer. The idea was so radical, so risky, that he never publicly announced his intention. He blandly named his new company ITC for International Technology Corporation. He set up his main offices in Geneva, drawing the pool of physicists working at CERN. For several years afterward, nothing was heard from Doniger or his company. People assumed he had retired if they thought of him at all. It was, after all, common for prominent high-tech entrepreneurs to drop from view after they made their fortunes. In 1994, Time magazine made the list of 25 people under the age of 40 who were shaping our world. Robert Doniger was not among them. No one cared. No one remembered. That same year, he moved ITC back to the United States, establishing a laboratory facility in Black Rock, New Mexico, 1 hour north of Albuquerque. A thoughtful observer might have noticed that he had again moved to a location with a pool of available physicists, but there were no observers, thoughtful or otherwise. So no one noticed when during the 1990s ITC grew steadily in size. More labs were built in the New Mexico site, more physicists were hired. Doniger's board of directors grew from 6 to 12. All were CEOs of companies that had been invested in ITC, or venture capitalists. Bleh. All had signed draconian non-disclosure agreements requiring them to post a significant personal bond in escrow, to submit a polygraph test on request, and to allow ITC to tap their phones without notice. In addition, Doniger demanded a minimal investment of $300 million. That was, he explained arrogantly, the cost of the seat on the board. You want to know what I'm up to. You want to be part of what we're doing here. It's $350 million. Take it or leave it. I don't give a damn either way. But of course he did. ITC had a fearsome burn rate. He had gone through more than $3 billion in the last 9 years, and Doniger knew he was going to need more. Problem number 1, Doniger said, our capitalization. We need another billion before we see daylight. He nodded toward the boardroom. They won't come up with it. I have to get the approved 3 new board members, Gordon said. That's enough to sell in that room? I know it is, Doniger said. They see burn rate and they want to know when it ends. They want to see concrete results, and that's what I'm going to give them today. What concrete results? A victory, Doniger said. The dipshits are going to need a victory. Some exciting news about one of the projects. Kramer sucked in her breath, Gordon said. Bob, the projects are all long-term. One of them must be nearing completion. Say, the Dordogne? It's not. I don't advise this approach. And I need a victory, Doniger said. Professor Johnson has been out there in France with his Yaleys for 3 years on our nickel. We ought to have something to show for it. Not yet, Bob. Anyway, we don't have all the land. We have enough of the land. Bob, Diane will go. She can pressure them nicely. Professor Johnson won't like it. I'm sure Diane can handle Johnson. Of course the assistants opened the door to the conference room and looked into the hall. Doniger said, in a goddamn minute! But he immediately began walking toward the door, and he looked at them over his shoulder. Just do it! And they went into the room and closed the door. Gordon walked in with Kramer down the corridor. Her high heels clicked on the floor. Gordon glanced down and saw that beneath the very correct corporate black Jill Sanders suit, she was wearing black slingback heels. It was the classic Kramer look, seductive and unattainable at the same time. Gordon said, Did you know about this before? She nodded. But not for long. He told me an hour ago. Gordon said nothing. He suppressed his irritation. Gordon had been with Doniger for 12 years now. Since advanced magnetic days at ITC, he had run a major industrial research operation on two continents, employing a dozen of physicists, chemists, computer scientists. He had to reach himself out to superconducting metals, fractal compression, quantum qubits, and high-flowing ion exchange. He'd been up to his neck in theoretical physics, the very worst kind. And yet milestones were reached. Development was on schedule, cost overruns were manageable, but despite his success, Doniger still never really confided in him. Kramer, on the other hand, has always enjoyed a special relationship with Doniger. She had begun as an attorney in an outside law firm, doing work for the company. Doniger thought she was smart and classy, so he hired her. She was his girlfriend for the next year, and even though that was long over, he still listened to her. She'd been able to head off several potential disasters over the years. For 10 years, Gordon said, we've kept this technology quiet. When you think about it, it's a miracle. Traub was the first incident to get away from us. Fortunately, it ended up in the hands of some doofus cop, and it won't go any further. But if Doniger starts pushing in France, people might start to put things together. We've already got that reporter in Paris chasing us. Bob could blow this wide open. I know he's considered all that. That's the second problem. Going public? Yes, having it all come out. He's not worried? Yes, he's worried, but he seems to have a plan to deal with it. I hope so, Gordon says, because we can't always count on having a doofus cop sifting through our dirty laundry. I'm going to stop there. I hope you enjoyed that reading. Have a lovely time of day, whatever it is. See you next time. Bye.